Hey everybody, it's Monster back again with Opus Gaming, and I'm here today to bring you guys a Whitebeard deck profile, actually. This is a deck I'm really excited to bring to you guys because it's going to be one of my main decks. I've been playing it a lot, and it's actually something I've been trying to put a little bit more R&D into, but I just got really excited and I wanted to bring you guys the deck profile today. This deck is going to be more of a mid-range version of Whitebeard, which I think is a really interesting way to play the leader, but we're going to do a really deep dive into all my choices and things like that when I get into the deck profile, as well as where I think it kind of stands in the meta, and the last few tips and pointers and things like that. But before we do any card talk and stuff like that, you guys already know, just got to remind you, drop a sub, leave a like, leave a comment. If you're not subbed, especially, obviously if you're not subbed, drop a sub. But we're on our way to 500 subscribers, so we can do our first reveal of some of the stuff that we're giving away for our 1,000 subscriber giveaway, and we are so close to that 500. So if you're not subbed and you've been seeing my content, you like my content, leave a sub. I'd really appreciate that. But and then all the homies, if you're just supporting, leave a like, leave a comment, help me get on the algorithm. I'd really appreciate that. Help some of these videos get out there. But yeah, no, talking about Whitebeard, it's been such a fun deck, and like I was saying before, I do wish I had a little bit more R&D to put into it, but this is a version of the deck that I'm going to keep on testing and keep on trying to get to the right space for the more mid-rangey Whitebeard players out there. But yeah, no, it's a deck that's built for me, and I'm really excited to bring you guys, so we're just going to jump straight into the deck profile right now. Alright, and we're just going to start with the deck profile here, getting into the leader. His effect is end of your turn, add one card from the top of your life cards to your hand. Starting off at 6 life, that's really awesome. And just kind of going through the game, you're going to have this kind of source of plussing your hand 1 at the end of every turn. So there is some kind of planning with that, even with your last life. If you know that your opponent is swinging at your life and you know that you're going to end up taking the last life on the last turn, sometimes you usually just take that attack, right? Because you don't want to pick up the life anyway from your leader effect and not have access to it going into your next turn. So small things like that, but you kind of learn that as you go into leader. But let's get into some of the lower cost blockers here. So, all right, there we go. We're going to start the deck profile off with actually just the blocker package in general. We have Chopper and Bartolomeo. For both of these are both pretty powerful cards, but I like to hold the Chopper till the end of the game. I don't want to clog on him. The reason we're not playing for is just because we don't want to see too many of him just coming off a life and then not being able to counter out of. But with Bartolomeo, on the other hand, this card is really powerful just because you're going to be able to counter with it out of your hand, and then on top of that, you're going to be able to just play it for a cheap cost. It's also got a pretty powerful effect of boosting itself plus 3k on your opponent's turn, so in the mirror match and things like that, it's not going to be able to be popped by all those cards that pop 3ks or less. With this deck profile, one of the things that we're really going for is kind of like a more mid-range style deck. We're not really rushing our opponent down, or we are, even though our leader is taking life every turn, we are using those resources to be aggressive onto our opponent so that we're keeping tempo with how many life our opponent has, or putting our opponent on really low hand size, and then also just grinding out to a position where our opponent isn't able to finish us. So that's going to be where we're going to start off with the blockers here. All right, I think that's a pretty good position for those. All right, getting into the 2K counters here, we're going to talk about all of them. We do run a lot of them because our leader is so big. All right, we'll start off with the Beppo, though. Beppo, all these 2K counters actually double as more than just 2K counters. They're cards that you can play, and actually they're pretty important parts of the strategy. So I do like to play a higher count of all of them. Beppo is the only one that we play 3 of, just because you do want to board this one, but it's not too usable to board. It's a card that requires a lot of setup in that sense. So you board it every once in a while, but a lot of times it ends up just staying in your hand as a 2K counter, and that's totally okay. Moving on to the Otama. The big thing with Otama is that reducing your opponent's cards by 2k so that all your 3k cards that pop cards are increased just by 2k. So you can pop 5ks for pretty cheap. You do lose the 2k counter in hand, so replacing that with some of your other ones is really, really important. But having this kind of be one of the base cards, Otama is a fantastic card. We're not playing the 1 cost kind of engine in this deck, which is something that I think is a really strong engine in general, but I'm just not playing it with this one just because I don't have too much space. I do want to remove a lot of my opponent's cards, and I do want to field off a lot of my opponent's attacks without spending too much resource, because life is such a precious resource. But every once in a while, Otama just kind of comes down to really help you make sure that you're keeping your opponent off of a board. So, and it pairs really well with the card that we're going to see later, so I really do like Otama. Moving on to the Usop. Sorry, I think I tapped the camera there for a second. Moving on to the Usop. This card I added in here just because your opponent is going to be using a lot of events in the later game to get out of your attacks, because your leader is just being 1k higher as a base just means so much. It's 1k, one more card out of their hand. When you're just kind of like measuring your DP size to what your opponent has in hand, that 1k counts for a lot. So setting up an Usop on your turn and then just swinging in with like a 9k leader, so they have to dump 2 cards out of hand and you plus 1 card in hand, is actually really good. This is kind of like one of your late game draw engines. It's a card that just kind of sits on the board. And your opponent is going to have to focus resources on it to remove it, but it really does help you kind of cycle into cards in the late game. So normally I don't like Usop, but this is something that I've been testing lately, and I've actually been enjoying it quite a little bit. So Usop is like kind of the perfect 2k counter because it just doubles so well. You can dump them really early in the game and then just find one in the late game and just slap it on board, and you really only need one. If you get 2 of these, that's kind of like overplaying it. I wouldn't really ever, or you're already going to win a game where you have 2 Usop and you're drawing 2 cards every event card your opponent plays. So yeah, no, Usop is a fantastic card, but we're going to talk about a tech that I have coming up next. So let's move these off. We'll just put these right here. And we're going to talk about Gordon. The reason I'm playing Gordon is also it just combos very well with the Otama, not the Uta. The way that Gordon comes in really effectively, though, is just reducing things by 3k so you can hit the bigger bosses. It pairs really well with Otama. So when in the mid game, when you do have a really big hand from picking up 3 life from your 3 cards from your life every turn, you can dump 2 cards, right? So Otama and Uta reduce a card by 5k. So you can start popping cards that are 8k base and lower. So you can hit those, use his kids against green, which is really important just for playing 2 cards from your hand and then using a 3k counter. Or even like really, really big cards like your opponent's Newgate. You can clear those because we do play Jet Pistol. We do play those bigger board clear cards. And you can use some of your Gordons and your Otamas in contention, or just 2 Gordons together to get rid of those bigger cards. So that's why we're playing the Gordon. It's a really cool card, and it's actually so useful reducing your opponent's card by 3k. That's a really unique number that you don't get to see too much. So, and just to let you guys know, we're gonna start posting all of these deck profiles, the pictures of them in the Discord. So join the Discord. The link is going to be in the description, but that's just gonna be an easier way just because I do kind of pile them off on the side. But we're gonna start getting into the Whitebeard Pirates, and one of the more important ones that we're gonna talk about is gonna be the Vista. This is the main card that we're looking to pair with the Uta that we're talking about earlier, and we're looking to pair with the Gordon on top of obviously things like the Beppo if we end up going with that strategy. But this is a card that you can hold in hand. It has counter power, and then on top of having the counter power, when you do play down the card, popping a card 3k, reducing cards is just so easy. So that is a range of cards, and you're still always going to be playing 3 for this card. So this card is actually really just at the end of the day a very versatile character card to be using. I really like Vista. Easily one of the best cards that we have access to in the Whitebeard Pirates archetype. The next card we're going to talk about is actually a card we're just going to talk about Vista or Marco by himself because he is so important, and there's actually a really big point to talk about with this card. And that point is how many Whitebeard cards you kind of play in your deck. The thing that's really important with that is that there's a lot of lists that don't play a lot of Whitebeard cards because A, they're hard to search, and B, they're hard to kind of like use in conjunction. So this card's power level is kind of brought down a little bit because you can't play a whole bunch of Whitebeard cards, but this card is a fantastic just because it's a blocker on your opponent's turn, and then on your turn when you do have Moby Dick, it's a really powerful attacker. Makes a lot of impact on the board state, and when you have multiple of these and you do have a big hand with lots of cards that aren't counter powered, it's so much easier to block with this card, right? Let it die right away and then discard a card that didn't have counter power, so you keep all the counter power that you have in hand, and then you can kind of use the rest of your hand as utility. Marco has a really good, powerful concept to him, but like I said before, he's limited mostly by the card pool in which you're forced to play in the deck to build these decks out. So, and if you guys thought that the only 2k counter that we were playing were those, 4, 8, 11, we are going up to 15 because we have 4 Josu. Josu is another card. All these cards double, right? They play 1 slot, and then they also double as another slot. You know, Marco Defender Attacker, Vista, small body bopper, but also a big body popper. because you have so much in the deck to support that. This card just embodies that all the way. It's the defensive card when you need it, but it also is a 4-drop rush character that when you have Moby Dick on the field, well, you have to put a Dawn on him to get rush, so he's going to be 5k, but when you have Moby Dick on the board, he's going to be a 7k swinger. So just really, really useful all the way through the game, and those situations as well where a 2k counter doesn't get you out of a really big swing. You can block with the Marco, discard the Josu, and then that way you kind of circle back into a position where you're not getting screwed over by committing your Marco, and you're still using your 2k counter, but it's just one of your many 2k counters, and you're still using it as a way to get out of an attack. It just kind of sucks that you have to sack a blocker in that situation as well. But like I was saying before, the draw power in this deck is where the weakness is, and we're not playing the Straw Hat engine, so we're not playing an engine to constantly recur cards. So what we're really trying to do is whittle down the game state to where our opponent doesn't have very many cards to have access to. We also just don't have very many cards to have access to, so we're removing the cards that they hard play on those turns, and then also swinging into them to pull counter out of their hand. And Portgas D Ace, just Ace, helps with that so much. What he does is he comes down, reduces 2 things by 3k, makes it easier for you to pop things and swing into things, and then he also gains rush. You can play him before you have Whitebeard on the board, and that's really nice, but I like to just play this card post Whitebeard. You play down the Whitebeard, and then you have a really big turn to just swing into your opponent for a lot of attacks, and a lot of times your opponent just can't afford the additional 7k, sometimes 9k push swing. So that's something that's very important. All right, moving on to the Edward New game. This card is the linchpin of the entire deck. Honestly, this is the most important card in the deck, and you have to find this card. We're not playing the 1-drop searcher, so even though you do have to find this card, we just don't have the deck space to play that card. So it really is about either this card ending up in your life and picking it up, or you just drawing this card. It helps so much with closing out the game because it boosts your leader to 8k, which makes it so much easier to defend, and then you also don't have to pick up a life. We really want to slow down on the picking up life. I like to go down to about 3 life, and then when I'm at 3 life, I like to usually use the event card to stop myself from going down. If I do have to take a life from my opponent just being super overly aggressive, that's okay because I go down to 2. Now my Marco is live, and I can swing back into my opponent's life, and there is still that one area of variance where you go down to 1 life to turn on Moby Dick. So that's where kind of the life variance kind of comes in. But with Edward Newgate, you want to be dropping this when you're usually at 2 life, and then you want to drop it pretty much every turn that you have access to it after that. Controlling how much life that you're taking on your own and going into the mid-late game with full control on the board is usually how I try to go for games. And how I try to pilot this deck. This is something that I'm just trying to learn. I think that it's a little bit more mid-rangey of a style of deck, or a style of playstyle for the deck, but I think that it's something that really fits my personal playstyle and something that I do want to continue to test and try and build with all these kind of like more unique choices like the Gordon and the Beppo and cards like that. So let's reframe, and then we'll get back into these event cards because there's a lot of events. All right, let's put him down here with the rest of the boss cards. Getting into our one-stop shop we just use these events as 1-card outs to our opponent's attacks. It's going to be Guard Point for the early game, Radical Beam for the late game. Really, really simple defensive setup. Once you're at 2 life, I forgot to mention that earlier when we were talking about life thresholds with the cards that we're playing, but once you do hit 2 life, your Radical Beam is on, but gaining plus 3k, going up to 9k naturally on your leader will get you out of so many like 8k swings and things like that from your opponent early on in the game, and it still only costs you 1 card. Guard Point's just a card that your opponent always has to be wary of. I do like playing a 2-2 split just because there's so many states of the game: early game, mid game, late game. Yes, Guard Point is not as good as Radical Beam in the late game, but it will get you out of some sticky situations in the early game. So that's something that's really important to I think to balance out the 2 of them. So I like to balance out the 2 of them. There are a lot of people going full on Guard Point, and I'm not mad at you guys. I think full on Radical Beam, and I'm not mad at you. One thing about my list as well is I am balancing the blocker to event card ratio, just because sometimes you need to be aggressive and have cards, or to have turns where you can completely use all your Dawn without having to play reserve to play for these. So I do like using kind of a balance. So when you board a blocker and then float into those game states, I think that it does have some value. Next up, we do have Moby Dick. This card is really sweet because it has the trigger to play the card. But when you're on 1 or less life, your leader and all your Whitebeard pirate type characters get plus 2k, and this is how you go for game. When you're whittling down your opponent with 7ks for the first 2ks, first 2 swings, and then usually it's 9ks from your leader for the rest of the game, right? Because when your opponent's playing blockers, that's when you're doing a lot of your low end removal. And then if they do play bigger blockers, we do have some stuff for bigger blockers as well, as you saw in the deck profile. But managing what your opponent can take and then going into the late game and being like, well, you can try to face down this, 12k Edward Newgate, 9k rush ace, 9k leader swing, as well as whatever else I have that's on the board as well, like a 7k Marco. But a lot of times it's just too much. I'm playing 2 of it just because you don't want to see it too much. It is kind of a dead card, and it's only useful with having the Marco on board. And I just like a balance of it. I don't want to see it too often, and I can finish the game out without it. So I don't think it's like something that you need to see to be able to finish the game, right? But I think it's a useful card to finish the game. All right. Next up, we have You May Be a Fool, But I Still Love You. This card is another linchpin of the deck. This is how you're going to stop starving yourself on resources in the mid game. I usually like to use this card on 3, and I hope to see one. This card might be going back to 3. When I was playing it at 3, I feel like I saw it very consistently. There's very few situations where you kind of break on this, where you're going into the late game and then you're getting a bunch of these. But that did happen to me like once or twice. It was very early on in testing, so I did go down to 2. And right now it feels like it's kind of like a luck sacky card, right? You have to see it, or you want to see it on curve, right? It does help when you're on 1 life, you just played your Newgate, and you're not completely through your opponent's board, so you play this on a post, like a 10-Don turn, right? Post Newgate, now you still have your 1 life, and you have the rest of your Don to set up a proper defense, as opposed to pulling that life and letting your opponent swing out to you raw, and just having nothing to defend yourself. So having this card is useful, like I said, in a lot of the other cards. In the early game, mid game, late game, you can use this card in different ways. When you're tapping 9 for Newgate, you do want to follow it up with this card. But if your opponent does have a bunch of cards on the board, like an Ivankov deck, and then they're just swinging really big numbers at you, it can be hard to have cards in your hand that don't have counter. So as players, you guys can kind of go through, if you are using this deck profile as a template, as players, you can go through and kind of just like, look at the ratios and kind of decide for yourself. But I'm playing 2 right now as a balancing act, and I'm thinking about going to 3. All right, getting into some more of the really techie cards, we'll just talk about Round Table because this is something that you won't really see in very many other deck profiles. But the thing I like about Round Table, like I was talking about with comboing the Gordon and the Uta earlier, that just means that you have to have those cards. And having this deck be a deck that I actually don't have too many ways to search and add cards to my hand, the amount of cards that I have to play from hand is important. And with Round Table, this is just one-stop shop removal, or not removal, but reduction. So when I'm looking at a really important card on my opponent's side of the board, I don't have to search my hand for the perfect amount of reduction to hit the card and then the perfect removal to hit the card. This card plus any removal is going to hit that card, and having that resource is really important to me. That's the reason that I'm playing this card. But it is really nice, reducing something by 10k and then just either using Edward Newgate for free, Beppo for free, just tapping 3 and playing a Vista, making it very easy, or tapping 1 and playing a Seaquake, making it very easy, is just where this card comes in. So it really simplifies the removal aspect of the deck, and if that's something that you're trying to play towards, like I am trying to play towards, this is a really useful card, and you'll find yourself being able to use this in a lot of situations. So going from that kind of more pseudo removal style card with the Round Table, we're just going to go directly into like actual removal. We can just set Round Table over here because this is the rest of the deck profile. All right, this is the rest of the removal. We're playing 2 Seaquake, 2 Gum Gum Jet Pistol. The reason we're not playing a whole bunch of these, like I was in earlier builds, I think I was playing like 3-3, 4 of one, 3 of the other. The reason we're all the way down to 2-2 is just because the removal aspect of the deck kind of comes down to being like kind of the undertone of the deck. You want to resolve these cards, but you don't need to resolve them on every single card that comes on the board. You want to have access to them and remove key targets, and then you want to deal with the rest of the cards. But Gum Gum Jet Pistol for 4 is just like Round Table. It just makes things easier. If you don't have a bunch of reduction cards, or you have no reduction cards and your opponent taps 5 for a Basil, you still have things like Gum Gum Jet Pistol to just fall back on. You don't need to find the Gordon for the turn. You don't need to find the Otama. You don't have to find the Vista. You don't have to hope to top deck the rest of the combo in your hand. You just have the removal in hand, and that's where Jet Pistol really comes in and just assists the deck. Same thing with Seaquake. 1 cost, 3k removal. Very, very simple. As well as both of them having triggers. It's the main effect for Gum Gum Jet Pistol. Sorry about that. And then for Seaquake, it's give up to one of your opponent's or leaders or character cards minus 3k power for the turn. Really, really useful defensively. So all these cards are just kind of come through to be like offensive, defensive cards, but you want to see them in multiple different variations of the game or points of the game. Where I think this deck shines, I think that Whitebeard is just so powerful. I think that it's a really powerful, I think you can play the deck in a more rush down style deck, but I do think that this mid-range style deck is actually really cool, and it plays out this long game that it's crazy because you're still taking damage from your leader effect, but like you're putting on so much aggression on your opponent and you're really staving off your opponent's curve. You're really trying to remove their Okikus before they get damaged. You're trying to remove your opponent's Basil Hawkins, or, you know, against purple, you're trying to remove their kings and things like that before they can stick and do things to you. And it's a really like back and forth between you and your opponent. I think one thing that this deck needs and can use is obviously a search draw engine. I can't figure it out right now. Like, for the life of me, I can't figure out what I want to play to try to get cards in addition to my hand. That's where the Usop came in, but he's not enough because he relies on your opponent playing a certain type of way, and you can't always rely on that from your opponent. He's great in the mirror match. He's great against like blue. He's great against even green with the Punk Gibson and stuff, because they'll rest him with Punk Gibson and then try to attack into him, which is just defense for you. But for the most part, like, we don't have another out to a draw engine, and that's the one thing that I think that this deck could use, because plussing our hand size is just going to add so much to what this deck can do. So, like I was saying before, this deck, you want to grind your opponent out. You want to put your opponent to a game state where it's like you and your opponent both don't have too many cards in hand, but like the board presence that you've made is like very, very impactful. And I think that's very possible with all of the DP reducing, all of the destruction that this deck has. And then your leader is a 6k leader. There's some turns where your opponent just cannot attack into you, and that's fantastic. That's just defensive in and of itself. I think that Whitebeard is going to make a huge splash in the meta, and I think that this version, I think we'll just call it Opa's Beard. Opa's Beard is this like kind of like mid-range new removal version of the deck. Is something I'm really excited to continue to build and continue to just like test, because the more I play it, the more it impresses me, and the more I see like different lines of play that we can go. So I think that kind of wraps up everything for the deck profile. We're going to wrap it up here for today. But if you guys haven't subbed already, you guys already know, like I mentioned earlier, drop a sub down below, leave a like, leave a comment. But let me know, what do you guys think of like some things that I should think about for things to remove to kind of switch around the deck. I've talked about things like why I think you may be a fool is like such a good card, and like why it pairs so well with the rest of the deck. But like, what are some other cards that you guys think that might be able to take a hit? Is like Round Table into swinging into a card with Otama really worth it? I don't know. I'm still trying to like figure it out, but if you guys could sleeve this, try it out, let me know what you think of the deck and stuff, and leave a comment down below. I'd really appreciate it. We're still trying to build these decks. We're still trying to test OP-02, and that's something that I'm actually getting ready to go do later tonight after work, so super excited for that. But this is me, Jamonster, with Opus Gaming. I'm out. Take care, guys.